I welcome everybody to the latest in the series of Israel's LGBT organizations explained. This week I'm proud to welcome Elisha Alexander and Ella Amest from Ma'avarim, the Israeli trans community. So first of all, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate it. First things first, I would like to ask you both to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about the organization. Elisha, I understand that you're the founder of Ma'avarim, so let's start with you.
Okay, yeah. I'm the founder of Ma'avarim and co-CEO together with Ella. And yeah, next, Ella.
I'm Ella. I'm also co-CEO of Ma'avarim. I've been in the organization for 5 years now.
Wow. Excellent. So, Elisha, what was it that prompted you to start Ma'avarim?
Well, when we started Ma'avarim, it was 6 years ago, and LGBT organizations hardly dealt with the T. And there was another trans organization, but it wasn't very active. And I felt, together with some other people, that if we don't promote the trans community, it's not going to happen on its own, and we can't wait for LGBT organizations to include the T, because I felt that many times, like, we're the kind of, I don't know, they're doing us a favor, like, oh yeah, we have to include the trans also, and yeah, poor trans people, they're so marginalized, it's so depressing to be trans, and it wasn't very interesting for anyone to deal with. And also, I think because most of the people in LGBT organizations weren't trans themselves, so it was very difficult for them to understand how to include trans in a good way. For example, they expected, like, trans people to just come and volunteer like gay and lesbian people do, but the thing is that many trans people are in poverty, so it's very difficult to volunteer. So because you're busy, like, paying your rent and doing stuff like that. So there are a few reasons that Ma'avarim started, and I think one of them is because no one was really dealing with the trans community, and also because the discourse about the trans community was always like how horrible it is to be trans and how marginalized we are and all that stuff, which is true, but we wanted to really change the discourse, and one of the first things that we did in the organization was open a youth, how do you say, קבוצת מנהיגות? Ella, help me out here.
Sorry, my connection was unstable for a moment there.
Youth what?
מנהיגות, how do you say?
Leadership.
Sorry.
Leadership.
Yeah, youth leadership
Right.
group, because we felt that a lot of the trans community itself is, like, really depressed, and how horrible everything is, and how everyone's against us, and it is kind of true, but it wasn't something that was empowering. We felt that we had to change the discourse, so we really emphasized giving hope and the fact that trans people are important, and trans people are like, can be leaders and bring change, and that having trans people in your organization, in your life, in your family, in whatever, is like an excellent thing. And so that's like the kind of first things we did in organization, because the community was really depressed and the LGBT organizations were, like, ignoring the trans community.
That's great, absolutely. Fantastic. Anything you wanted to add there, Ella?
I'm sorry, what was that? I missed
Anything you wanted to add? Is that why? How did you get
first,
involved?
I wholeheartedly agree with the organization's vision, which is unsurprising, being co-CEO.
Excellent. So how did you first get involved? How did you hear about Ma'avarim and
Actually, it's funny that you ask that, because I really do not remember. I think maybe it was an ad on Facebook, or I saw one of my friends like or share one of their posts, and it was about joining the organization, or I don't know, doing some fun stuff. And then I came and saw Elisha and Jay, which is now the chairperson of the NGO.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest is history. Back then I was a medical student and I was in my third year. So I naturally did a lot of stuff to do with medicine and advocacy about access to care, and being a student, I also knew some of the really good research that's out there. I also lived in Jerusalem, so I did a few stuff there, a few things there, like organizing community meetings, but with some content in them. Like there was this one talk about food and people who are like YouTubing about food, and just to have something else apart from a few trans people sitting in a room, which there is not enough of, but quite a bit of in the community. And sometimes putting some content in can help bring people up and get more people involved. Nowadays, most of what I do in Mavarim is to do with the professional training program. We're currently capacity building for it and thinking about the future of how to make knowledge on trans people and tools to work with trans people more accessible to professionals. So it will be nicer and easier to get care. And
fantastic.
Yeah.
So
that's
how many members does Mavarim have now?
We're
depends what you count
Depends
as a
how
member.
you count.
We kind of discourage volunteering. We think one of our values is it's important to pay trans people for their work, and we're trying to convince everyone to do that. So we don't have, I mean, if there are trans people that really, really, really insist, then we're like, okay, you can volunteer if you really want to, but we try to pay people as staff. So I think how many staff do we have? 8? 6?
8 now?
7? I don't know. I'm so bad with numbers. I always forget.
I think it's 7. Yeah.
7, okay.
Okay.
And all of them are trans, apart from our social worker, who is a cisgender gay guy. We'll convince him. But so that's the amount of the staff, and we have a board that's 5 members. I'm so bad at this. And 2 of them are trans. We also recently discovered that you can get reimbursed for being on the board. So we passed a law that only trans people can get reimbursed on the board.
Okay, excellent.
And but we have like people that are following us on Facebook, and we have a, how do you say, scholarship program. So the people that get scholarships are also supposed to volunteer for us, but they're getting scholarships. So it's not exactly volunteering. It's an academic scholarship. We have 8, I think.
Okay. And would you describe Mavarim, is it a support group or is it social events or a combination of the two?
It's an NGO. It's a real NGO.
Fantastic.
That's another reason that we decided to start Ma'avarim, was there was no real organized long-term work for the trans community. I mean, there were like demonstrations here, the group opens there, then it closes, then another demonstration, then it was like very grassroots. And we really wanted to make something that's long-term, that has like plans for the next 5 years, or at least the next year. And in order to, I mean, if you want to get big money from the government, if you want to really make a big change, then you need a boring old NGO organization that works properly and has all the papers. There's a lot of important things happening in grassroots activism too. I'm not saying you should cancel that. It's also very, very important, but I can give an example. Just now there was the Corona, and it still is, and there was all these like emergency funds opening up. And if we didn't exist, then none of this would come to the trans community. The thing that we did in the Corona mostly was to write grant requests, and we didn't even use them ourselves. We moved them to a different organization, trans organization that does grassroots work on the ground, helping trans people that have nothing to eat, and trans women in sex work and all kinds of stuff like that, that we don't do. They do that, but we have all the papers. So
Yeah.
one of our goals was to have like an organized NGO with papers, because, and we managed to move about, I think it's over 90,000 shekels for the trans community, like direct support for people who
Amazing.
have nothing to eat. So
Fantastic.
that was a big deal, and we didn't do anything. We just had the papers. So that's really important. So we're not a support group, and we're not. We're the biggest. Maybe this is something that Ella can talk about. We're the largest, I guess, knowledge center about the trans community in Israel and for the trans community in Israel. We're also the smallest. We're the only one, but we strive to be the biggest. And maybe Ella, you'd like to talk about that.
Yeah. When people ask me or us, what's the difference between us and the different NGOs in the trans field or around the trans field, what I say is we're the trans people we're nerdy enough to get all the stamps of approval and keep all the documents and research in check, sort of.
Fantastic.
At least compared to the others who are busy doing groundwork, which is really important. We try and gather up as much research as we can and as much data as we can on the trans community. Most of it is from research other people are doing with more resources, some abroad, some in Israel. It's really important for us to give a platform to people who do this research, because it's usually not accessible to the community. Like even when someone who is trans and a social worker writes a thesis or a seminar about trans issues and says really important stuff, you might not be able to access it if you don't know them personally. So what we do is we have a really huge page of documentation of that, divided to subjects. Sadly, because we do not have the money to pay to translators, it's mostly in Hebrew, except for the studies that are in English, which have the English title to them. But we strive to gather up that knowledge, and not just research, but also some of our own surveys and knowledge about technical procedures, be it surgeries or facing the government, what's covered by the HMOs, or like your Israeli counterpart of an health insurance. And it's really important for us to gather it all in one place so people know they can come to us seeking it and ask questions if they don't understand it. And for example, if someone wants to know, just off the top of my head, should they change their gender ID or sex marker on their ID, if they should do that abroad or after they make Aliyah, because if it's more complicated there or not, or in our place. And we don't usually know what the procedures are somewhere, but we do know exactly what it takes to do it here.
Yeah. Okay, that brings up a really good point. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So yeah, one of the things that I find is that here at LGBT All In, we get contacted by people that are interested in making Aliyah. And obviously a number of those people are trans or in some way in the process of transitioning. And so one of the questions that comes up a lot is, you know, do I get my paperwork sorted before making Aliyah, or do I just make Aliyah and then worry about getting my ID card updated afterwards? So can you give some advice on that? Can you, again, as you mentioned, it depends upon which country you're coming from. In some countries, it's literally impossible to get your birth certificate updated. In other countries, it's possible, but you have to jump through hoops. In other countries, it's not a very difficult process. But if someone is making Aliyah from the States, from the US, from the Ukraine, from wherever, what advice would you give them?
Well, first of all, they can email us and ask what the procedure is here. If you know what the procedure is in your country of origin, then that's great too. So we can know better how to address it. In Israel, we're sort of in the middle. Like you can change your mark on the ID, but it's not as easy. Like I know that in Argentina and some places in the US, it's basically a walk-in procedure. You just go into the office, sign something, and you have a new ID. In Israel, if you're interested in that, if you have underwent surgery, that's basically that. You have to know who to email and what papers to send them. But we have that organized, and you can ask us. If you are not interested in surgery or didn't have it yet or unable to go through it, then you need to see a committee, which is 3 separate meetings of a psychiatrist, an endocrinologist, and a psychologist. And it's not a complicated process. You just need to meet them. They are in the central part of Israel or region
Now
of
it's
Israel.
on Zoom.
Of course.
Oh yeah, and
Isn't
they
it
also
everything?
get people on Zoom.
It's new.
Yeah.
So that brings up a good point. So once upon a time, not anymore, but once there was a time when you had to have had some kind of surgery before they would consider allowing you to update the marker on your ID. But these days, you're saying that it's not necessarily to actually have surgery.
Definitely, yeah.
Fantastic.
And there was a recent how do I say that? Change in procedure issued that really solidified that. It used to be you had to wait 2 years from when you first referred to the committee. And now you need like 6 months, and it could be retrospectively or retroactively.
Okay,
like if you've been trans for 6 months, the day you met the, of course, it's a lot better. It could improve. We believe that it should be a walk-in procedure, or like change your address. If you don't do it more than once a year, you can just go change it in the website. But this is what it is now.
Yeah. Okay. And there was something I wanted to ask there as well. You mentioned ID. So, I mean, is it possible, do people in Israel change birth certificate as well? Is that possible?
Not
Or
as far as we know.
is that part of the ID? Is that how to...
The birth certificate in Israel isn't really used. It's used usually like when you want to, I don't know, get a passport of a different country or something like that. It's not really used day to day in Israel. And as far as we know, it's impossible to change. We need to, I mean, part of the reason that the procedure changed is because of our work. So this is something that we also have to change, because I know that there are trans people in Israel that want to get like citizenship of a different country, so they would want to change their birth certificate in order not to encounter like prejudice or violence in the other country. I must say that I think you have more information than we do about if it's a good idea to do the procedures before or after, because I must say that there is discrimination within the Sukhnut. There is discrimination of Olim that are trans, and sometimes it's better to like hide the fact that you're trans, do all the Aliyah business, and then start transition if you can, or the other way around. Do all the stuff in your country, close it all up so nobody knows you're trans, and then in order to avoid discrimination. But there's discrimination all over the place, so it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be fought. But if you're wondering if to come out as trans and then do Aliyah, or wait and come out after Aliyah, that's what I would recommend. But of course, it's personal because there are other factors. Not everyone can wait because.
No, I have heard a couple of cases where trans people have had issues. I don't think. No, I am aware of one that is still ongoing. But there are situations where I suspect if they weren't trans, then the other concerns that the Jewish agency have wouldn't be such a major concern.
Yeah.
And so it's the fact that this is something and they're trans. If it was one or the other, it would be fine. But because it's both, it's like, let's take our time about it and let's not get back to them very often, and let's see if they're really interested, and let's see how hard they push. It becomes a...
Sounds kind of like our committee.
It's kind of whereas I think, a lot of people are welcomed in with open arms and their aliyah process goes smoothly. It's almost as if someone's got their hand on your forehead and saying, no, come, we want you here, please come. And
it's exactly the way the committee for surgeries work. I mean, yeah, surgeries are free, come get them. And then you're like sitting in that committee for years and people are kind of discouraging you from actually. So on paper, yes, their surgeries are included in the insurance, and if you're a citizen, there's no problem. But in reality, the committee is very long, and it can take like a year to finish it. And sometimes the doctors are not so nice, even though there's recently been a change, so things are getting better. And then they give you like bottom surgery in 2 more years or 3 more years. Like, yeah, sure. And then people get discouraged, and eventually they do it privately.
It feels like it's a lot of work every step of the way. So having said that, I just mentioned that some people do have issues when making aliyah. I wouldn't obviously ever want to discourage people from moving here. So I just wanted to ask you, compared to other countries, have either of you lived overseas or have you always lived here?
I've always lived here.
Yeah, okay.
I've lived in New York when I was a straight woman, if you can say that.
Fair enough.
What a waste of time to be in New York City when you're straight.
I'm interested to know what your perception is of how life is in Israel as a trans person. Because again, I hear from people that are living in the States or in South America or in Eastern Europe or other parts of the world. And some people are literally living in fear. They're not sure if they can go out for fear of being attacked, because they don't fit in, whether they, for whatever reason. How safe is Israel as a trans person, in your opinion?
Well, along with many other things, a lot of it has to do with skin color and how well supported you are, because prejudices overlap and synergize, so to speak. In general, I would say Israel is not an actively dangerous place. But again, many cases are complex, and some people's experience is different. I know that compared to like South America and Central America, we're doing okay. Maybe other countries in which violence is rampant. But well, that's.
You mentioned you mentioned before that a lot of the attitudes towards trans people, or the perceptions of, are very negative. And I remember that for a number of years now, there's been an annual, every November there's a Trans Day of Remembrance.
Yeah.
And having looked at the website a number of times, they list, and it's a heartbreaking website, because they list all of the trans people that have been murdered in a number of different ways. And you mentioned South America, which is why I bring this up. Brazil seems to be an incredibly very dangerous place to be a trans woman. And sorry, just to, you mentioned that the perception of, I'm so happy to see that there is a Trans Day of Visibility these days, which kind of counters the Trans Day of Remembrance. It's good that obviously it's two sides of the same coin, but it's important that both of those exist, I guess. Elisha, sorry, what were you going to say? What's your perception of being a trans person in Israel?
Well, first of all, I think there's less physical violence here. I mean, we didn't have any murders in the past few years. I think, on the other hand, that sometimes, how do you say, like Israelis are very nosy. They're not polite, and they have to ask stupid questions all the time, and sometimes can be really, really difficult. I mean, when I pass, but I know that many times when people go abroad, then it might be more dangerous in certain areas. But on the other hand, people leave you alone. They don't ask these stupid questions when you're on the bus and annoying you all day. So I think it really depends on what kind of person you are, because some people really can't deal with all this nosiness, and everyone has to ask you questions, and and also I think Israelis, there's a lot of sexual harassment against women in general, so that also includes trans people. But I think transphobia itself is lower, so it's like there's a lot of misogyny, so trans women get hurt, but I think it's somehow less transphobic. That's my feeling, but it's not based on anything. It's like that's what I feel. I think as we didn't have the backlash really yet. Not like I don't know if you the backlash when there's all these like feminist organizations and real people that are kind of organizing against trans and like having how do you say, like doing anti-trans laws. So there are like these feminists that are anti-trans already. They're starting to organize and talk about it and be annoying, but there are no anti-trans laws yet. And I think it's eventually gonna happen here too. But it's sad to say, but in Israel, like Palestinians and Arabs are hated much more than trans people. So because like Palestinians are the enemy, so and Palestinian, I mean, it's not Palestinian necessarily, but I mean, religious Muslims would be against trans. So if we're against Arabs, then we have to be pro-trans. So the politics here is very strange. Like right-wing people can be really pro-LGBT because they want to be against Arabs or something stupid like that. So everything here in Israel is kind of weird. And we're not the most hated group. Like I think in the United States, like trans people are really hated. And here we have other people that are hated. So like, oh yeah, trans people, they're annoying. But there's these Palestinians, they're the worst, whatever.
It's a much bigger problem to deal with. Yeah.
So politics here are very like confusing and strange. So, but it can change. I don't know. I really cannot say.
Yeah. It's disturbing what's been going on in the state. Obviously, in the last couple of weeks, it's been off the scale. But for the last few years, with states like, was it North Carolina, with the anti-trans laws for toilets, it's like, just, I mean, where do they get their ideas from? It is just so bizarre. And I just sometimes, when you talk to people like that, or if you hear their opinions, it's like the image in your mind of what a trans person is obviously so very different to the image in my mind of, you know, what it means to be trans. And it's like, where is yours? It's just, I just can't fathom it. It's bizarre. So I really hope you're wrong when you say that these things will eventually come here. I hope maybe that
we're trying to like organize for it not to happen. For example, the thing is, I think one of the reasons that we're kind of lucky in Israel, that Israel is relatively small and the United States is really big. So if there's like a really small minority that hate trans people, then they make a lot of noise because there are a lot of people. And in Israel, it comes out to be like, I don't know, 50 people. So they can't really organize and do stuff.
And one thing that's great here as well, one thing I've noticed is that, I mean, you go into a cafe, into a restaurant, and there is no separation of toilets. So everyone's using the same one. And you know what? No one's dropped dead from having to use the same toilet as someone of another gender. It's like, you know.
There's actually a lawsuit against that.
Fantastic.
No,
say that again. A law against what? Sorry.
Against the fact that there was unisex bathroom.
They tried to float that, did they?
It wasn't they. I think it was just someone looking for money. So they were like going to all these restaurants and convenience stores and saying, hey, according to law, you're supposed to have 2 bathrooms that are like one for male and one for female, and you don't. So give us lots of money. And that was the point. It wasn't like against trans people. It was just
someone trying to make money
from restaurants.
Wonderful. I think after the restaurant, I mean, there just isn't the space. If you've got to make space for another toilet, you've lost a couple of tables. It's just doesn't make any sense. One thing I also wanted to ask you, so you mentioned the fact that you know, there are people within the trans community that are on the breadline, that are living in poverty. Obviously, I would imagine there's a number of reasons for that. It's, you know, trouble finding work, familial issues as well, people getting kicked out from home. Is that something that you still see, a kids getting kicked out for not fitting in right?
Someone says that the mirror for Israelis, we also have another founder. He's no longer in the organization. Now he works in Betrol. Betrol is a youth hostel for LGBT. And he always says the mirror for Israeli society is the kids who are in Betrol. And the kids who are in Betrol are today, I mean, when it just opened, it was like gay and then like lesbian. And now what's happening is that most of the kids there are trans.
Mm.
And the few that are, the few that are like gay or lesbian are either from Arab communities or from Orthodox communities. So you can kind of see which are the communities that have the most difficulty. So there is more acceptance. There's even this group of mothers of trans kids. They're called the Lionesses.
Oh, fantastic.
And they accept their kids, and they're like not only accepting, but they're also like supporting them and fighting for them, which is kind of cool because when I came out, that didn't exist. And so there is more and more acceptance, but I think the majority of trans kids are not accepted. Not necessarily kicked out, but sometimes they just run away from home because they can't stand the fact that they can't be themselves. So they figure, it's better to be outside my house than.
Yeah, but also like some of those who aren't accepted are like living their lives and trying to find the safe bubbles that they have. Like I think most of my generation, quote unquote, are people who were like really shy, geeky kids, or like the outcasts, and just live their lives, and then sometime after 18 discover that it's like an option to be trans, or like realize it beforehand, but only realized it applies to us later. So like some kids who are not accepted and get that like gender diverse behavior doesn't fare well, then they stay closeted, which is the reality for a lot of us. And some do come out of the closet later, and that has different outcomes once your parents are less financially responsible for you.
Absolutely, yeah. I can understand that. But also coming out later as trans can have more of an impact on how the transition goes as well.
Well, yeah, but people have been doing that for years and it works well.
Okay.
Like, of course, you could say that for the kids who know, like, since they're little and, like, want these stuff, the best thing is blockers and hormone therapy, since where they begin puberty. But there are also other alternatives. And I know people that, like, heard the word trans in the right context only when they were, like, 50 or 40 or 60 or whatever, and then it clicked.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how that works?
Like, we transitioned too. Like, I was fairly young. I was 21 or 22 when I started, and things are working well. It's like transitioning at a later age isn't like huge verdict against you. It's just things are different.
Fair enough.
And for some of us, being visibly trans is a goal. Like, I'm CEOing a trans NGO. I mean, looking trans is like my ID card.
Excellent, yeah. So how is it? I mean, for looking for work, do you think there is discrimination? Or, you know, how bad is the discrimination?
We know there's discrimination.
Yeah.
One of the big surveys that was done by the Ministry of Economics, I don't know how to say it in English, נציבות שוויון הזדמנויות בעבודה,
The people responsible for job equality, I guess.
Employment Commission something.
Okay.
So they did a very big survey, and it turned out that 68% of trans people were discriminated at the workplace. Excuse me, 68% of the workers in the trans community were, and about 32% are unemployed. So they weren't even in the. So there's very, very, very big discrimination. Now it's crazy because I think now 20% of the entire population is out of work. So that's like, oh, you're almost like the trans community. So yeah, employment is really bad, but I think that like high-tech organizations are like into this diversity thing. So we're trying to ride on that and say, yeah, having trans people at the workplace is so important. It will make your product better and you'll make tons of money if you just employ us or something like that. And it's kind of working. The thing is that like if you look at high-tech, many times they don't have like entrance, how do you say, jobs. Like you have to have 3 years of expertise and 2 degrees from this and that. And not all, but many trans people don't have that because they're in poverty in the first place. So they work like a convenience store. And so we're trying to convince big companies to try to think of jobs that people can start and they don't have experience. And another one of our projects that's worth mentioning is, and I actually did sort of, is we have a scholarship program for trans students for finishing their first degree. So we give full scholarship, and there's some companies that support it. And in July, I think we're going to start, how do you say, crowdfunding? Yeah, crowdfunding. Yeah. Which will probably not go as well this year than it did last year because nobody has money. But we can only try. Yeah, the truth is that, first of all, I want to apologize because I'm saying some really horrible things and I'm like laughing while I do it, but that's like because I think in the organization, we deal with a lot of depressing figures that are actually connected to real people. And so we kind of started, I don't know, making fun of the fact that the situation's so bad. But it's not funny. So I just wanted to mention that because I'm like, yeah, and we have this and that, unemployment and blah, blah, blah. But what we do try to do in the organization from the beginning is try to give people hope. And I think what's kind of different in the trans community in Israel compared to trans communities abroad is there's a lot more humor. Maybe it's a Jewish thing, I don't know. But there's so many, like there's a group for trans memes. Say memes or memes?
Memes, yeah.
Like
is there on Facebook.
Hysterical. And I think that like sometimes you see all these arguments within the trans community that are sometimes really important, but about, I don't know, what is the correct, like the correct words to use or blah, blah, blah. And then you sometimes like forget that what's really important is to make sure that people are alive and healthy and happy. And I think the Israeli community kind of realized that. I'm not saying like you're supposed to be like not respect other people's identity or anything like that, but try to take things a little less serious in order to differentiate between like things that are more semantic and things that are life-threatening. So that's something kind of good that I like about the community in Israel. I don't know, Ella, what do you think? Do you think I'm talking things?
I think it's not like it isn't like either semantic or life-threatening, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people do take stuff more humor, mostly when it's in the community. It's like stuff that when people say outside or without context, then would make most of my friends mad. But in trans groups where we know we're safe and we're not threatened, then we can laugh all about that. And that's something really important that we have in our trans communities, and is great. And sometimes it could be a hard time, like navigating and finding the right place and trying to fit in with the language barrier, I suppose. But it is something that's great. And I think it's one of the really nice things that's going on.
I think also people are
Like
kind of smart about picking their battles. I mean, sometimes there's battles that you're wasting more energy arguing with someone than actually making change. And I think people are like, self-care is important, and they know, okay, maybe I shouldn't start arguing about stuff in the Facebook, and I'll just go and do something helpful for
More
myself
constructive,
and my
exactly.
friends.
Very true indeed. Yeah.
Also, I would like to say that there's a really important history of queer activism that's mostly bi and trans. Not just that, but like many community leaders are queer, genderqueer, bi, and trans that have a history of learning what battles to pick and building communities, both virtual and physical, like face-to-face communities. And that's something we have as a history and don't always remember. But it is there and it is in our roots, which is, I think, some of the places in the LGBT community in Israel where there's a little more community memory or collective memory, which is something that's sadly rare in many activist and marginalized communities. So we have people who did go through many different waves of activism and stuff that happened around the country and in the world. And like a generation in activism is like 2 years or something. So it's not a lot, doesn't have to be a lot of time, but we have people that make a point out of saying that people have been saying that and that for years, and that's new, but it's like that, and making a point out of laughing when you can. So I think that's good context to have for what Elisha said.
Fantastic. Excellent. Just wanted to open questions up to anyone that's in the Zoom meeting. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to, Peter, I can see you waving. And anyone else, just before you say anything, if you want to type into the chat window, you're more than welcome to do that as well. Peter, hello.
Hello. I was just wondering about the political identity of being trans, because I always remember I saw a documentary about a group of lesbian and gay people and trans people sharing a house. And there was this one guy, he was a trans guy, and he started a relationship with a straight woman, and a gay guy outed him as trans. And he was so angry. And they said, but you are trans, you were gonna have to tell her sometime. And he said, when do I stop being trans? When am I just a guy? And I wonder, is the aim of being trans to create a identity where we are trans and that's who we are? Or is it aiming for a time when trans people don't have to say we're trans, I'm just a man or a woman or whatever? That's my question.
Oh, I really want to answer that, but I'll let Ella speak, because she probably say something smart.
3 genders, men, women, and whatever, as whatever I can relate. But more seriously, I think that's very personal. But in Ma'avarim's vision, we see trans people as visible political leaders of the gender freedom and human rights movements. So in our point of view, people who live as trans and live out as trans are important. Not to say that people can't stop being trans and go on with their lives. A lot of people do that, and they live their good lives and are better off that way for themselves. But we do believe that having a visible trans community that's important in social movements is a key for the human rights movement.
Excellent. Thanks for that.
My turn.
Yeah.
And afterwards, I want to, Veronique also put up. Yeah. Okay. I don't think there's any point in being trans. You're just trans. There's no point. There's no point in being a flower. You're a flower. But I think it really depends on, for some people being trans is just like, oh, this is just what happened to me and I wasn't in charge of that and I'm a guy and that's it. And that's great. And some people don't even define themselves as women or men. And sometimes it's really diverse. But I think what the point is not to, if it's good to identify as a guy or is it better to identify as a trans guy or is it better to identify as, but we would like to create a world where the choice to come out as trans is not something that you'll be discriminated for, or it will be a good thing, like, oh wow, cool, you're trans, but nothing like in a fetishistic way. That I think many people don't want to come out as trans and just want to get on with their lives, because the moment they come out as trans, there's like a million questions and discrimination and stuff like that, and they don't want it because they just want to live their identity. And some people also, they don't identify as trans. I mean, it's not, it's kind of forced upon them. I mean, if they had a choice, they would just be guys. So, yeah.
That's a great question. Thanks very much for that, Peter. And Elisha, you said Veronique had a question?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
Well, I do have a comment in regards to what was just answered and asked. Can I say that before I ask my question?
Of course.
Basically, I think there's a saying in the U.S. that if you don't vote, you don't have a right to complain about things. And I think that being trans is inherently political, especially being trans and Jewish, because I think it's our cultural thing to kvetch all the damn day. And quite honestly, if I can't kvetch about being trans, then what the hell does it mean to be Jewish and trans in the first place? But to my question, I am a transgender American citizen currently living in Alberta, Canada. I do have all my identity documents changed over, my birth certificate, ID card, both Colorado and Alberta, my US passport, all that stuff. If I legally am consistently female on paper, would I face the same kind of discrimination from the Jewish agency that has been discussed here before, or would things like my voice or my brow ridge give me away once I have my in-person meeting with the Jewish Agency for Israel?
Either one of you like to cover that?
Huh?
So Elisha or Ella, would like to answer that, or?
I really can't say. I mean, I think that if you're stealth, and I think also many times, for example, there's this, there's a trans woman who's, she's a very high-ranking, I guess, CEO in some very big company. And I really can't tell already. I don't know who passes and who doesn't pass. I think everyone passes. Sorry for the term. And she claims that she doesn't think she passes, but no one has any idea that she's trans because they can't imagine a trans woman in such a high-ranking position. So it's like out of context. So it could be that you're making aliyah, and if you pass or don't pass, it wouldn't really matter. They're not gonna, because I would try. I would try. That's like my gut feeling, but I really don't know. It's just like my gut feeling. I don't have enough information to say something smart.
I just, yeah, again, in defense of the Jewish Agency, we did mention before that a couple of people have had issues making aliyah, but on the whole, there have been a number of trans people that have made aliyah with no problems whatsoever. I think they've been very
good because I only hear about the bad, so I was sure that everyone has trouble.
That's the thing. Because of what we do, we hear about the ones that don't work, but there are plenty of people. There are a couple of people where I've heard the date got delayed a little bit, or they asked for an extra bit of paperwork, but no major issues. There's plenty people, and as both Ella and Elisha said, this is in terms of street violence, in terms of violence against trans people, I think Israel fares very, very well. Again, just because I look for problems, when last time I looked at the Transgender Day of Remembrance website, I scrolled down looking for Israel, and it's nice to see that the occurrences of murders of trans people are zero in this country, so it's a safe place to move to. Whether you decide to tell the Jewish Agency or not is completely up to you. But I would like to say confidently that you're not going to have any issues making Ali out as a trans person at all. Okay? If they find something that they don't like about, if you've got a criminal record, then that might tip the scales or something. But generally, it's as long as you're not a trans convict, you're not going to have any problems. What a bizarre phrase to use, but anyway. Does that answer your question, Veronique?
It does cause me a little bit of a follow-up question. I apologize.
So I want a follow-up answer about that voting business. Yes.
I think some other people have asked questions or raised their hands to ask questions.
Oh, sorry.
You can write it in chat, Veronique, and we'll see that.
Okay.
So I see Tal raising their hand, and I think someone waved earlier. I don't know if that was a question thing.
Can I ask a question?
Who's that talking?
So I arrived here around 2 years ago. It was approximately the same time I realized I was probably transgender, which I later concluded I was. I was really insecure. I needed support, and so I didn't have any Hebrew language, and it was actually quite difficult to find the Maverim organization.
It's very difficult for me to hear you.
Okay. I'll go a bit closer. I arrived here in Israel around 2 years ago. It was the same time approximately I started having thoughts about that I was actually transgender, which I later concluded I was. I didn't have any Hebrew. I was insecure. I really needed someone to talk to, and it was very difficult to find this Maverim, anything in English. So I was just lucky that I was living at Masada Street in Haifa, near the Kehila in Haifa, and it was my saving. I was saved by those guys down there. It's a fantastic place, but this Maverim, it's really difficult to find a way in. I can find as an English speaker, I can find it's in Ganmaya, and that's more or less it. There's no specific meetings mentioned anywhere and anything like that. So it's a comment. Of course, I would like to hear maybe it's a conscious decision you made.
Yeah, we don't have any translation for our website apart from how to donate and how to get there, I think. The truth is that because we realized that in order to be effective, the way that we want to work with physical communities, like if you're actually looking for a group or people to meet or someone that you want to see physically, then we want to empower and work together with local communities, like the community in Haifa. So what we kind of changed focus, and we decided that rather than us opening groups in various places in Israel, we will work together with local communities like in Haifa and Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and try to work together with them. The thing is, we don't have a lot of resources. Recently, both us and the LGBT Olim requested a grant, and we didn't get it. In order to we wanted to do translation for our website to Russian actually, but we don't have. It's not a conscious decision, but it is sort of. I mean, so we don't have a lot of. I mean, if you get to us, then we can help in English, but we don't have our website in English and all that stuff. So I can only say that you're right, and we hope it will change eventually.
That's one thing we'd love to help you with. So we do have people that are polyglots And if you are interested in having the website translated or even just a page so that people can find out what the group's all about and how to contact, I'm more than happy to help. All right,
Yeah,
so we can talk about that. That'd be wonderful. Excellent.
We need
Cool.
to update the website anyway. It's really old and it's with our old logo and it's horrible.
Wonderful. All right, so we are going to have to wrap up very shortly. Are there any other questions? So I missed the raised hands before, so thanks for pointing that out, Ella.
Alan had a question?
Comments there, just reading through.
Tal had a question?
Tal.
Yeah, thank you. If I can, yeah. First of all, the translation. If you manage to translate it into English first, then I will be happy to volunteer as a translator from English to Russian because I'm a professional translator. But I'd be happy to volunteer. And second, I had a question that I've actually struggled to find an answer to that. I know that there is a group, Trans, and I've looked all over it, but I haven't found an answer. So I'm planning the top operation. I'm a transmasculine person and I'm planning top operation. And I only heard a rumor that it is possible to get it without a committee, a commission or whatever. If you are in Klalit and if you're going to Ikilov. And I'm not sure if it's true, and I'm not sure that, you know, I need a committee or I don't need a committee. Could you please comment on that?
Well, I can say that anecdotally, a few people managed to get the basically glorified paychecks or insurance coverage for top surgeries and facial feminization surgeries in Ikilov. As a matter of policy, that's not official. It's like if you manage to squeeze through the cracks, people have done that, but it's squeezing through the cracks.
Interesting. Okay.
Like trying to push your way through and.
If I write to you later and ask you how to squeeze through the cracks, would you give me some answers? Do you have any?
That's actually what I have, but Elisha?
In general, maybe I'll write in the chat. You can contact us and we answer by email, we answer by WhatsApp, we answer by phone. I guess that would be kind of silly, but so I'll write the information here in the chat.
Wonderful. Excellent, thank you for that.
Contact us, this is the email, and I'll put the WhatsApp number.
Thank you very, very, very much.
And we also had one question from Levine.
Hi, yeah, I was just curious. This is a lighter question. I've seen the Trans Kids show that was aired on TV, and it was also released as a film. And I'm wondering what the representation of trans people is in the media in Israel. Is that an exception, or is it becoming more positive? What's your view?
It's becoming more positive.
I think a lot of it was also the work that we did. We had this paper about how to talk about trans people in a correct manner, like using the right pronouns and things like that. And there used to be like really horrible press representation, not necessarily because they were anti-trans, but because they used terminology like a man who became a woman, things like that. And they thought like, yeah, we're so great. And we accept you. And every time something like that came out, we would send out this paper about how to write correctly. And also when people went to interviews, we would hand them this paper and they said, give it to everyone you meet from the press. And eventually they learned. And I think the press is fairly friendly, except for one newspaper, which is actually leftist newspaper, strangely enough. Even the right, I think there's this religious website it's anti-trans, but I have the feeling that the person that's writing it is kind of pro-trans, so they write properly. They don't use like bad terminology, and it's really strange. So I think press coverage is good, even even when it's anti-trans, for very strange reasons.
Lovely. Excellent. Thanks for the question. All right, we are going to have to wrap up, unfortunately. So I just wanted to thank you both, Elisha and Ella, for agreeing to be interviewed this evening. It's been brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So the plan is to upload this to Facebook and add it to the other interviews that we've had there. We're going to have a break next week. I'm going to try and organize another interview for the 21st. And then on the 28th, we have someone coming from Hoshen. So that's the schedule coming up. All right, so thank you everyone for joining us. I really appreciate it, and it's great to see you all. And thanks, Ella and Elisha as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you can always
pleasure.
contact us in if you have more questions and stuff like that, feel free.
Excellent. All the details there in the chat window. Wonderful. Thank you very much.